This show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Hello and welcome to the Thinking Tree Talk Show. I'm Kratika, and today we have with us Professor Partha. Although he needs no introduction, but still, I would like to introduce him to you. He's currently the director of IIM Pune. He was formerly the professor of economics at the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. Earlier, he had contributed his sites globally, advisor to the executive director at the IMF. In fact, he had also worked in the specialist cadre of economists in RBI's Economic Research Department. Mr. Ray has been passionately educating students about economics since many years. We are grateful to have you on the show, sir. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview, sir. It's just great having you here. My first question to you.
Pleasure. Pleasure is mine.
My first question to you, sir, because we are discussing the monetary policy. My first question to you, sir, how do you think to this pandemic? What do you think is the major difference between the monetary policy response of the developing economies versus the developed economies?
Let me begin at the beginning. Monetary policy, essentially, what it tries to do, it tries to reduce the cost of borrowing or increase the availability of credit, and perhaps both in some way or the other. The essential difference between advanced countries on the one hand and developing countries on the other lies in the basic fundamentals of monetary policy. The standard operation of monetary policy lies in terms of a key central bank interest rate, which is called repo rate in India, which is called federal fund rate in the United States. Now, the first point is the repo rate in India is at 4%. The Fed fund rate of US is near zero. The first basic difference is the interest rate in the advanced countries have hit rock bottom, and it's very difficult to conceptualize interest rate below zero, though we'll explain later there are countries with below zero interest rate. That's the first point. Here we have scope for further reduction of repo rate, whereas in the advanced countries, there is no scope for further reduction of the interest rate. That's the first basic difference between monetary policy here and monetary policy there. So what it does, therefore, central bank tries to operate what they call at the long end of the yield curve, long end of the yield curve. What do I mean by that? They cannot operate in the very short end because very short end is already near zero. They start operating at, slightly longish end. And they dilute the quality of the collateral. Again, what do I mean by that? Typically, central bank operates with central or state government securities. I mean, primarily central government securities. That's what they do. Whereas, think of it. Suppose RBI accepts an IOU from Mr. Ray to Ms. Kritika, then that solves my all credit problem, because RBI accepts a piece of paper where I write, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of such and such thing, and if the central bank accepts it, that solves my liquidity problem. Okay, so that's a dilution. While individual IOUs may not be qualifying, but there are various other kinds of collaterals that qualify there. And what do they do, therefore? They increase the size of the balance sheet. Just to give you one number that will convince you that we are really talking of large sizes, in 2019 December, the US balance sheet size was around 4 trillion. So this 2019 2019 December. In 2020 December, the balance sheet size was around 7.4 trillion. So technically, within a year, the size of the US Fed balance sheet has increased by 4.3 trillion. Now the question is, what's the inflation rate of the United States? If you think the inflation rate of the United States is pretty low. In other words, even with all this, the inflation rate remains low. So they have still certain scopes of doing it. Now, in that case, I come to the third point. I first said the interest rate. Second, I said the inflation rate. And I come to the third point. Third point being the muscle power of the central banks. Now, technically, central bank can print any amount of money of the country. But the question is, who will accept that money? Now, in a country like United States, or a country in the Euro area, or say UK, or in Japan, so currencies like dollar, pound sterling, euro, or Japanese yen, there are huge demand all over the world. When India accumulates Forex in terms of dollar, therefore we buy all those dollars. So third difference between the advanced countries on the one hand and developing or emerging markets like other is the muscle power of the currency. And please note, muscle power of the currency is a peculiar thing. The acceptability of currency does not mean that more powerful a currency, more powerful a country, the more powerful this currency. Currency market is altogether a different thing. For example, the four currencies that I have talked of are the four major currencies in the world, whereas countries like India and China, they are very powerful country, but their currencies are not that powerful in comparison with all these currencies. So therefore, end of the day, to summarize, three things that make them separate. One, the level of interest rate, they're low, here not so low. Second, the rate of inflation, very low there. It's not so low here, not so low. It's low by our standard, but not so low. And third is the muscle power of the currency.
That was a great explanation, sir. My second question is, every country has come up with some monetary policy change to bring the economy on track after COVID. How do you think the response has been successful in countering cyclical slowdown?
Now, as you understand, COVID is not a financial sector phenomenon. COVID is a health crisis. And therefore, the ultimate solution to the COVID lies in terms of the improvement in the health economy. I mean, to me, it appears the solution will appear, one, extent of immunization, extent of vaccine that people get, and how much the second strain, second wave is coming. So that's a push and pull between them. Having said that, what was the monetary policy impact? What's the monetary policy response? All over the world, the typical in a crisis scenario, what monetary policy can do, as I've already mentioned, they can essentially make more and more credit available and make the interest rate down. So whether this is COVID or some aliens attacking us, it doesn't matter. The monetary authorities can only make more and more liquidity available. Now, seen from that standpoint, they have done a wonderful job. I mean, we don't have the luxury of counterfactual, but at least the latest IMF numbers, what it says, they expect the 2021 growth rate to be much better. I mean, at least if you look at 2020 growth rate, it was minus 3.3, the global growth, whereas in 2021, they expected 6.0. Even if you discount that 6.0 by certain percentages on account of the second strain, the second wave, still, even if it becomes 5, that's at least part of a V-like shape recovery. I don't use the word V-shaped recovery, but it looks like at least there's a turnaround. In this turnaround, monetary policy has played a great role, not uniformly, but all over the world. And if you compare, the extent of monetary stimulus globally is much higher all over the world, irrespective of the countries, now with respect to what has happened in 2008. So in 2008, the monetary expansion, whatever was there, now it is much more. So countries across the world have come aggressively, swiftly, appropriately, so that people don't suffer about lack of liquidity, lack of money. And therefore, you did not see a parallel financial market crisis. You can imagine, along with this COVID, a parallel financial market crisis would have been very, very expensive to all economies. So therefore, to me, it appears they have done a good job, and they have not done it alone. So both monetary and fiscal policy together, they tried to intervene, and they have been successful to some extent. Now, when I say this, I also warn about something. There is enormous amount of debt formation is happening as a result of the expansionary fiscal policy. Will the next crisis be a global public debt crisis? Will the next crisis be an expansion of the central bank's balance sheet? We are not too sure, but we are handling one crisis at a time. And as you correctly said, in terms of cyclical behavior, we are at least on the right kind of path.
Thank you so much for that explanation, sir. I've been looking at the news for a really long time, and I haven't heard any person actually commenting on the monetary policy response, how India has behaved in that manner. And it's really important, especially for the students, to understand that this was a very good move, and how they have behaved was very important. And this was the way it should have been done, because every other source is busy criticizing what the government has been doing. But to understand that what they have been doing is actually right for the economy is very important. So thank you so much for that explanation, sir. My third question to you, sir, that after the advent of COVID, because we are discussing the monetary policy response of the advanced economies, so after the advent of COVID, the US Fed has slashed the interest rates to a range of 0 to 0.25% and launched an open-ended bond buying program entailing the purchase of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. How do you see its impact on liquidity of US dollar in the international markets?
That's a good question, very interesting question. And partly, if you recall, I have answered it while I was answering your first question. But the question is much deeper. When the interest rate is near zero, it becomes difficult for the central banks to do. What can they do? Now, people have done two things in advanced countries. One, they have done an unheard of thing of adopting negative rate of interest. And second, as you said rightly, they have got into this huge bond buying program. Let me explain these two things separately. First, negative interest rate is something like that I borrow from you, and while paying you back, I'm giving you less money. Can it happen? Answer is no, then everybody will be borrowing. It's like this. Think of yourself. Some of you have, or maybe the students' parents have, what they call a safe deposit locker. In case of a safe deposit locker in a bank, you keep things in the safe deposit locker, and end of the day, end of the year, you pay a service charge. Take this service charge as a negative rate of interest. In other words, it's like this. It's not for you and me, but for a bank, end of the day, they have huge surplus cash. There's not enough credit demand. So therefore, what they do, they go to the bank, they want to keep them. Now, if you keep them, it's like you are using the safe deposit facility of the bank, and bank forces you, bank asks you to pay for a service charge. Now, you might ask me, why do you have to keep it there? You might keep it in your own vault. At least the interest rate on a currency note is zero. I mean, technically, the nominal interest rate of a currency note is zero. The answer is there are costs in keeping huge volume of cash. So they are essentially not huge volume of cash. They are book entries, they are electronic entries in the respective balance sheets. Therefore, that's a price they have to pay. And a number of countries, whole of Euro area, Switzerland, and other countries, you have this negative rate of interest. That's one part of the story. The second part of the story, what you asked me, when it becomes zero, what do they do? As I already said, they go on buying more and more things. Why do they go on buying more and more things? So that people get huge amount of liquidity. They should not suffer. And I don't want to give you a laundry list, but you can think it the kind of things that the US Fed has given. They've allowed commercial paper funding facility. That's like they're allowing commercial paper to be discounted with them. They allowed primary dealer credit facility. Then they allow money market mutual fund, secondary market corporate credit facility, term asset-backed securities, the kind of mortgage-backed securities you have talked of. Even there is paycheck protection program. There is what is called Main Street lending program. There are even municipal liquidity facility. I mean, it's like paying like this, that the Indian parallel will be the bonds floated by BMC, Mumbai Municipal Corporation, is accepted by RBI as a collateral. Why do they do that? So that the BMC does not suffer from any liquidity crunch. The central bank cannot invent a vaccine. Central bank cannot stop the second wave, but the central bank does a crucial thing. They can ensure that even in a very distressed time, people have ample supply of liquidity in the market. That's how they do. And while they do it, they shed all kinds of old conservatism, the textbook economics that we have always talked of.
So, sir, I still did not understand that how will this impact the liquidity of USD in the international markets? The decision by the Fed, how will this impact the liquidity in the international markets?
When the central bank, say suppose the US Fed accepts Mr. Ray's bond as an eligible collateral, then I can pledge it with the US Fed. I will get money. When I get money, I will pay salaries to my employees. They will spend. When they spend, the huge multiplier process will happen. And when they will spend, what happens essentially, there will be huge stream of liquidity that goes out every nook and corner. Plus, added to this is dollar. What's dollar? I mean, it's said about dollar that it has an exorbitant privilege. Everybody and their uncle holds dollar. So when the dollar demand is huge, therefore, US dollar is being absorbed everywhere all over the world. It's not in the physical territory of US. When you think of GDP, you think of a geographical territory. When you think of dollar supply, it comes from a geographical territory, a nation called United States. But when you call out dollar demand, it is no longer confined to the geographical territory of US. I, staying in Calcutta, I want to go abroad. Say I want to go to Dubai. Dubai's currency is not dollar, but I want to withdraw dollar from the local State Bank of India. So therefore, people will demand dollar. Therefore, every nook and corner, the world will be sloshing with liquidity. In fact, very interestingly, an interesting consequence of this you feel in the stock market. If you see the global stock market, they were moving down. They were moving down till about March end of 2020. Now, from April onwards, they were all zooming high. Why were they going up? Were there been a new drug? Were there been a new vaccination drive in March 2020? No. Because central banks have pumped liquidity all over the world, therefore what happens, some part of this liquidity got its way in the stock market. As a result of which, all over the world, you get a peculiar contradiction. On the one hand, while the COVID-related deaths are happening, on the other, the stock market has been booming. Now, you might say the stock market could be booming in terms of because they were essentially stock market looks at the long term. But apart from that, a large chunk of money they have got from the Fed, and they also got the message from the Fed that Fed is bullish on the economy. And therefore, they thought they can afford to be bullish.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a really great explanation. And my last question to you, sir, that with respect to the monetary policy, what is the best course of action that India can take now to combat the negative effects of COVID and ensure a faster recovery?
Now, India has been taking all sorts of the right steps. Now, as I said earlier, the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India has shred its conservatism. On the one hand, they reduced the repo rate hugely over the last few years, in fact, 1.5, 2 years. That's one part of the story where repo rate has come down from 6.5 to 4%. Apart from that, they have huge amount of open market operation and what is now called Operation Twist. What is Operation Twist? It is essentially when the government comes with a huge borrowing program, there are mismatches between different ends of the yield curve. There are mismatches between the short end and the long end. So it is substitution of one type of securities of the short end by another type of securities in the long end. By doing that, they smoothen the yield curve. By doing that, they perhaps help the government to reduce the cost of borrowing. So the Reserve Bank of India has been reducing the interest rate, one. Two, they have done open market operations and done separate particular sort of credit injection program. And third, they have done this typical newer things like Operation Twist, the Indian version of Operation Twist. All the things together, I think they have done the right kind of a thing. But having said that, please do remember there are limits to which a central bank can solve a COVID kind of a crisis. This is not a financial market crisis. This is a real sector crisis. So ultimately, the solution lies in the hands of the healthcare provider, in the hands of the medical doctor, medical scientist, and our behavior so that we stop the second wave and we therefore reduce the thing, increase the vaccination. That's the first line of defense. In second line of defense, the role of monetary policy can come in. And on that ground, RBI has been doing a very, very fine, splendid job, keeping the local situation in mind, looking at the inflation on the one hand and lack of growth on the other. So it's kind of very, very tightrope working on the part of the RBI governor, and he's doing a fine job.
Thank you so much for that explanation, sir. To sum up your answer, I can just say that for the audience, I can just make this clear that RBI has been doing a phenomenal job of controlling the crisis so far as what they can do, because this is a healthcare sector crisis. So a majority of the decisions and the things that can make a difference actually lie in the hands of the healthcare sector. And to be blaming RBI for not controlling the situation is not good, because they've been doing what they can and they've been doing a great job at that. And that is important to understand. The major changes that has to be made, or the major decisions that have to be taken are to be taken by the healthcare sector, and there's only a limit to which RBI or the central bank can do something about it. Thank you so much, sir. That was a great explanation. It was a great session. To be able to talk to you was very, very enlightening for me. And on behalf of the whole team of Ecoholics, I would like to thank you for coming to our show, gracing our platform, and giving us your precious time. It was just fantastic having you here, sir.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And I really commend Ecoholics for such efforts when we were students, our friends who were aspiring civil servant or competitive exam givers, they didn't have this kind of opportunity. Their knowledge base was limited to some magazines and newspapers. So it's very great effort that you are bringing us to them. I feel, I can touch the students whom I don't otherwise meet. Thank you very much for having me here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us, sir. Thank you so much.